Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs, dramatised by Out of the Darkness Theatre Company. Outside, the night was cold and wet, but in the small living room the curtains were closed and the fire burnt brightly. Father and son were playing chess. The father, who played some very unusual moves in the game, had left his king in danger, so much so that even the lady knitting by the fire commented on it.
"Listen to the wind,"
said Mr. White, hoping to distract his son from a terrible move he had just made on the board.
"I'm listening,"
said the son, looking at the board.
"Check."
"I shouldn't think you'll come tonight,"
said Mr. White, looking out the window.
"Mate!"
replied the son. Mr. White suddenly cried out.
"That's the worst part about living so far out. Of all the awful places to live, this is by far the worst. You can't walk on the path without getting stuck in the mud, and the road is flooded. I don't know what the council are thinking. I suppose they don't care, because only 2 houses have people living in them."
"Never mind, dear. Perhaps you'll win the next time,"
said Mrs. White, sharing a smile with her son. Suddenly, they heard the garden gate bang shut loudly, and some heavy footprints walking up the path.
"Here he is,"
cried Herbert. Mr. White opened the door to a tall, heavy-built, strong-looking man.
"I'm sorry for your recent loss,"
said Mr. White as he ushered the man into the living room. Mrs. White looked at him with sympathy as he introduced himself to the room.
"Sergeant Major Morris."
"Would you like a drink, Morris?"
"Please."
replied the sergeant, taking a seat by the fire. After he warmed himself and had a drink, Morris began to talk. He talked about the military, distant lands, and the people he met along the way. The family listened with enthusiasm.
21 years Morris has been away. He left a young man, and now look at him.
"He doesn't look like he's taken much damage."
I'd like to go to India myself just to look around a bit.
"You better where you are."
I'd like to see the old temples and the fakirs and the street entertainers. What were you saying about a monkey's paw or something, Morris?
The man looked up quickly.
"Oh, nothing. Nothing worth talking about.
"Monkey's paw?"
It's just a bit of magic."
said the sergeant major. The family leaned forward to listen closer. The man stood and filled his glass.
To look at is just a normal paw, old and dry.
He took something from his pocket and held it out for them. Mrs. White drew back with a look of disgust, but her son took it from the man and looked at it closely.
And what is so special about it?
Mr. White asked, taking it from his son and placing it on the table.
It had a spell put on it by a holy man. He wanted to show people that fate ruled their lives, and those who tried to change it would be sorry. The spell meant 3 different men could have 3 wishes each.
"Well, why don't you 3 wishes, sir?"
asked Herbert.
"I have."
The soldier replied quietly.
"And did you really have 3 wishes granted?
"I did."
And has anyone else wished?"
The first man had 3 wishes. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was death. That's how I got the paw.
The group fell silent.
If you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now. Why do you keep it?
I have thought about selling it, but I don't think I will. It's caused enough problems already. And anyway, people won't buy it. They think it's a story. And those who do believe want to try it first and pay me after.
If you could have another 3 wishes, would you have them?
I don't know. I don't know.
The soldier took the paw and suddenly threw it onto the fire. Mr. White cried and removed it quickly.
Oh, let it burn!
If you don't want it, let me have it.
I won't.
Said Morris.
I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Throw it back in the fire.
Mr. White shook his head and looked at the paw closely.
How do you do it?
Hold it up in your right hand and say your wish out loud. But I must warn you what might happen.
Mr. White laughed and took the paw from his pocket. Morris grabbed his arm.
If you must wish, please wish sensibly.
The man put the paw back into his pocket and they all sat down for dinner. While they ate, they forgot for a while about the paw and listened to the soldiers' stories of India. Soon after, the man left to catch his train.
Did you give him anything for the paw?
A little. He didn't want it, but I made him take it. Then he asked me again to throw it away.
Not likely. Why, we're going to be rich, famous and happy. Wish to be a king, father? Then mother can't complain all the time.
Herbert ran around the table laughing as his mother chased him, armed with a piece of cloth.
I don't know what to wish for. I have everything I want.
You would like to pay off the house, wouldn't you? Then wish for £200. That should do it.
They watched Mr. White as he removed the paw from his pocket. The man, feeling slightly embarrassed that he believed the story, held it up. Herbert sat at the piano and struck a few chords.
I wish for £200.
A crash came from the piano the same time as the man cried out, frightened. His wife and son ran to him.
It moved. As I made my wish, it twisted in my hand like a snake.
Well, I don't see the money, and I doubt whatever will.
It must have been your imagination.
Oh, never mind. No harm done. It still gave me a fright though.
They sat by the fire again, the wind howling outside. A door upstairs banged shut and the man jumped nervously. A silence fell on the three and soon Mr. and Mrs. White went to bed.
Maybe you find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed.
Herbert said as he wished them a good night. The young man sat for a while staring into the fire. He could swear he could see faces in it, the last so scary and monkey-like that he couldn't draw his eyes away. After a while, he threw water over the fire and took one last look at the monkey's paw and went to bed. In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning, as it streamed over the breakfast table, Mr. White laughed at his fears. The room felt like it always had, and there was an air of health and happiness that had been absent the night before. The dirty, dried-up paw had been thrown onto the cabinet carelessly, as everyone had lost all belief in it.
I suppose all soldiers are the same. How could we believe in such nonsense? How could wishes be granted these days? And even if they could, how could £200 hurt you?
It might drop onto your head from the sky.
Morris said things happened so naturally.
Well, don't break into the money before I come back.
Said Herbert as he rose from the table to go to work.
It might turn you into a greedy old man.
His mother laughed. She followed him to the door, watched him walk down the road, then returned to the breakfast table as they sat at the table, Mrs. White remarked,
Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks when he gets home, I expect.
I bet. But the thing moved in my hand. I swear it did.
You thought it did?
said the lady, trying to calm him.
I know it did. There was no thought about it. I had just... What's wrong?
His wife didn't reply. She was watching the movements of a man outside, who appeared to be looking at the house nervously, unsure whether he should enter. Thinking about the £200, she noticed the man was very well dressed and was wearing a new silk hat. 3 times the man stopped at the gate, then walked on again. The 4th time he paused at the gate with his hand upon it, and then suddenly, as if making his mind up, walked up the path. Seeing this, Mrs. White hurriedly removed her apron and placed it on the chair before racing to the door.
I'm sorry for the mess.
She sat down and waited for the stranger to talk. He was strangely silent.
I was asked to call. I'm from Mo and Megan's.
The lady sat up in alarm.
What's the matter? Has something happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it?
Mr. White spoke before the man could answer.
Now, sit down, and let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure you've not brought bad news, have you, sir?
Mr. White looked at the man. He was expecting it was bad news, but hoping he was wrong.
I'm sorry.
Began the visitor.
Is he hurt?
The stranger nodded slowly.
Badly hurt, but no longer in pain.
Oh, thank God for that. Well, thank God.
She broke off as the understanding of her son not being in any pain came to her. She looked at the man, who avoided her gaze confirmed her fears. She turned to her husband and laid her shaking hand on his. There was a long silence.
He was caught in the machinery.
Caught in the machinery. Yes.
He looked out the window and squeezed his wife's hand lovingly.
He was our only child. It is hard.
The firm was wishing me to pass on their great sadness for your loss. I ask you please to understand I'm only doing my job.
There was no reply. The woman sat pale-faced. Her breathing was so low you could barely hear it. The man's face was that of terrible shock.
I've been told to say Mo and Megan are not responsible, and though they have no reason to make payment to you, they do wish to present you with a certain sum.
Mr. White dropped his wife's hand and, staring at the stranger, asked quietly,
How much?
£200.
was the answer. Mrs. White let out a scream and Mr. White fell to the floor. In the huge cemetery 2 miles away, the couple buried their son and came back to the house, which was now full of shadows and silence. It was all over so quick, they hardly had time to process it and kept waiting for something to happen. Something that would hopefully lift this terrible sadness from their hearts. But the days passed, and soon they realized they had to accept it. Some days the couple barely spoke to one another, as they had nothing to talk about, and every day was long and tiresome. It was about a week later that the man woke suddenly in the middle of the night, stretched his hand across the bed, and realized he was alone. The room was in complete darkness, and he could hear his wife crying quietly by the window.
Come in.
He said tenderly.
You'll be cold.
It's colder for my son.
He lay in bed. It was warm, and his eyes were heavy with sleep. He started to drift off at first, and then was fully asleep, when all of a sudden, a wild cry from his wife woke him with a start.
The paw! The monkey's paw!
Where is it? What's the matter?
She almost fell as she ran across the room towards him.
I want it! You've not destroyed it!
It's in the living room on the shelf above the fireplace. Why?
The woman started laughing through her tears before bending down to kiss her husband on the cheek.
I only thought of it. Why did I not think of it before?
Think of what?
The other two wishes. We've only had one.
Wasn't one enough?
He replied angrily.
No, we'll have one more. Go down and get it quickly and wish our boy alive again.
The man sat up quickly and threw the sheets from his shaking legs.
Good God! Are you mad?
He cried in horror.
Go and get it. Get it and wish. Oh, my boy, my boy.
Please come back to bed. You're not thinking straight.
We had our first wish granted. Why not the second?
Coincidence!
Go and get it and wish.
She cried with excitement.
He has been dead 10 days. Besides, I did not tell you before, but I could only recognize him from his clothing. If he was too terrible to see then now.
His voice was shaking.
Bring him back.
Cried the woman, pushing him towards the door.
Do you think I'm scared of my own son?
He started down the stairs and felt his way to the living room. Then to the fireplace. The monkey's paw was on the shelf. He felt a sudden fear. He feared even the thought that the wish might bring back his broken son's body. He started to panic as he realized he lost all direction of the door. His forehead was cold with sweat as he felt his way around the room until he found himself at the bottom of the stairs, paw in hand. Even his wife's face had changed as he entered the room. It was white, and to him it had an unnatural look on it. He feared her.
Wish!
It's foolish and wicked.
Wish!
He raised his hand.
I wish my son alive again.
The paw fell on the floor, and he looked at it with fear. He sank into a chair as his wife ran to the window and opened the curtains. He sat until he could no longer bear the cold, looking up every so often at his wife. When the candle finally burnt out, the man sighed with relief at the failure of the paw and slowly went back to bed. And soon his wife joined him. Neither of them spoke, but listened to the ticking of the clock. The darkness depressed him, and after lying for a time, the man summoned the courage to light a match and go downstairs for a new candle. At the bottom of the stairs, the match burned out. As he went to light another, he heard a knock on the front door. It was so quiet, only someone downstairs would hear it, as if the person knocking wanted to keep it a secret. He dropped the box of matches and stood in fear, staring at the door. He was frozen. Then the knock repeated. The man ran back to the bedroom and closed the door behind him. A third, louder knock filled the house.
What's that?
Cried the woman sitting up.
It's a rat. A rat. It ran past me on the stairs.
Another knock echoed through the house.
It's Herbie.
She ran to the door, but her husband, catching up with her, grabbed her arm.
What are you going to do?
It's my boy. It's my boy. It's Herbert. I forgot he was 2 miles away. Why are you holding me? Let me go. I must go to the door.
For goodness sake, don't let it in.
Cried the man.
You're afraid of your own son? Let me go. I'm coming, Herbert. I'm coming.
There was another knock at the door. And then another. The woman suddenly broke free and ran to the stairs. Her husband followed, shouting her as she hurried down them. He heard the woman opening the chain and pull open the bottom lock.
The top lock. I can't reach it. Come down.
But the man was on his knees, feeling wildly around the floor in search of the paw. He had to find it before the thing got in. The knocks came quicker now, and he heard his wife moving a chair and putting it down against the door. At that moment, he found the paw and frantically whispered his final wish. Suddenly the knocking stopped, with only echoes of it around the house. He heard the final lock pulled back and the door opened. A cold wind blew up the stairs and Mrs. White screamed in pain and disappointment. The man ran to her side. Then outside to the gate, the streetlight shone on the quiet and deserted road. The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs, dramatised by Out of the Darkness Theatre Company. Sergeant Major Morris and Mr. Megan was voiced by Alistair Hay. Herbert was voiced by Scott Collins. Mrs. White was voiced by Rosie Mackenzie. Mr. White was voiced by Gabriel Corcoran. Narration by Grant Christie. The Monkey's Paw was edited by Gabriel Corcoran, Grant Christie, Alistair Hay, Shane Simpson, Rosie Mackenzie, Scott Collins, and Gus Pettit. Artwork was created by Ross McShane and Hugh Carter, Ewan Sinclair, Ross Watson, Scott Anderson, Kieran Manson, Lynn Ramsey, Fiona Donaldson, Claire Foster, Levi Murdoch, and Emily Loveland. The Monkey's Paw is an Out of the Darkness Theatre Company production.